My hands shook as I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the unimaginable, my wife, Danielle, tangled with her boss, Greg, in our bed. The dim light cast jagged shadows on their panicked faces as they scrambled for their clothes, the silence suffocating and unbearable. My heart pounded as betrayal crashed over me, its weight carving this moment into my memory forever. Is this some kind of twisted joke? I managed, my voice breaking under the strain of disbelief. The words hung in the air like broken glass, and in that instant, everything I thought I knew about my life shattered. You won't believe how this unfolds. Greg lifted his hands in front of him, palms out, as if I were about to lunge at him. He looked panicked, like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Listen, Mark, it's not what you think, he stuttered, then glanced at Danielle as though begging her to speak up. Not what I think? I spat, my voice dripping with disbelief and bitterness. My eyes locked on Danielle. Why, Danielle? Why would you do this? I searched her face for a flicker of regret, a hint of apology, something, anything, to tell me that this wasn't who she really was. But instead of shame, her expression was cold, unyielding. Her gaze didn't waver. Mark, she said, her tone sharp and detached, I don't owe you an explanation. Accept it, or leave. But if you walk out that door, don't expect to see your kids again. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back a step, trying to process the venom in her voice. She wasn't just unapologetic, she was daring me to react. You don't even feel bad about this, I said, my voice softening, almost desperate. I wanted her to deny it, to tell me this wasn't real. You don't regret anything, do you? Her face hardened even more, if that was possible. No, I don't, she said coldly, her arms folding across her chest. She leaned into Greg as if to underscore her point. Greg's different, she continued, her tone sharp and dismissive. He's successful. He gets me. And he's everything you'll never be. Her words crushed me. This was the woman I had loved and trusted, standing there without a shred of remorse, choosing someone else over me without hesitation. Greg, standing beside her with a smug, self-satisfied smirk, looked like he thought he'd already won. Everything I'll never be, I muttered, hollowly repeating her words. You're really willing to tear our family apart over an office fling? Greg finally spoke, his tone infuriatingly condescending. Look, Mark, you don't get it, he said, shrugging. Danielle needs someone who's there for her. Maybe if you'd paid her more attention, she wouldn't have needed me. My fists clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. I was there, I said through gritted teeth, my voice taut with restrained anger. I was there every single day. For her, for our kids, for everything. Greg shrugged again, like my words were nothing more than background noise. I turned back to Danielle, pleading silently for some kind of acknowledgement, but her face was like stone, cold, unyielding, and indifferent. Suddenly, I heard movement behind me. Turning toward the doorway, I saw my mother walk into the room. Her expression was calm, almost indifferent, as though what she'd walked in on was just another mundane family issue. For a fleeting moment, hope sparked in my chest. Maybe she'd stand up for me. Maybe she'd be the lifeline I so desperately needed. Mom, I said, my voice trembling with both hope and fear. You knew about this? Her lips pressed into a thin line as she crossed her arms, looking at me with a chilling lack of sympathy. Mark, she said evenly, her tone cutting through the tension like ice, if you divorce Danielle over a little mistake, you can forget about calling me your mother. Her words knocked the wind out of me. I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to say something else, but she didn't. It's a small lapse, Mark, she continued, her voice sharp and firm. Any woman could have made it. And if you didn't notice that Danielle was unhappy, that's on you. The shock melted into anger, raw and searing. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. You're blaming me for this? I asked, incredulous. She didn't blink. Her silence was louder than any condemnation. Of course I'm blaming you, my mother said firmly, her voice steady and sharp. You let Danielle slip away, and now you're angry because someone else stepped in and did what you refused to. Instead of wallowing in your pride, you should be thankful for the family you still have and fight to keep it together. I stared at her, my thoughts spinning in disbelief. She wasn't just excusing Danielle's betrayal, she was justifying it, acting like it was a minor lapse in judgment. My eyes flicked between my wife and my mother, searching for some shred of remorse, some acknowledgement of the hurt they were causing me. But there was nothing. They stood there together, resolute and unapologetic, as though I was the villain in this story. Danielle's voice cut through the turmoil in my head like a blade. Maybe if you were even half the man Greg is, we wouldn't be in this mess, she said, leaning toward him with a smirk that twisted the knife even deeper. Her eyes were locked on mine, daring me to respond, to give her the satisfaction of an outburst. My fists clenched tightly, nails digging into my palms, but I refused to give her the reaction she wanted. I loved you, Danielle, I said, my voice trembling with restrained pain. I gave you everything I had. Everything. Her expression didn't change. She just shrugged, the indifference on her face cutting deeper than words ever could. Love isn't enough, she said coldly. It takes more than that, Mark. Greg provides for me, he understands me, and he makes me happy. Can you honestly say that we were ever happy together? Her words knocked the air out of me, leaving me momentarily speechless. I turned to my mother, hoping, praying, that she might offer some support, some semblance of compassion. But instead, she shook her head, her eyes as cold as Danielle's. This is your fault, Mark, she said sharply, her tone laced with disdain. You let this happen. If you can't hold your family together, you've got no one to blame but yourself. And don't you dare even think about leaving those kids without a proper family. The weight of it all crashed down on me. My wife and my own mother were united against me, painting me as the sole cause of this nightmare. The betrayal burned deep, but the realization that they felt no shame, no guilt, only blame, was what finally broke me. In that moment, I understood something painful and profound. I was utterly alone in this. Fine, I whispered, my voice so low it was barely audible. If this is how you all see it, then so be it. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room. Every step felt like a battle as the heaviness in my chest threatened to pull me to the ground. But I couldn't stop. I needed to see my children. They were the only thing that mattered now. I reached their room, pushing the door open gently. My heart clenched at the sight of them. My little girl was curled up in her bed, her tiny body rising and falling with soft, even breaths. My son lay sprawled out, one small hand clutching his pillow. A surge of protectiveness and love washed over me, mingling with the pain of knowing that their world was about to be irreparably changed. I knelt by my daughter's bed and brushed my hand softly over her hair. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open for just a moment. "Daddy's here, sweetheart," I whispered, forcing a smile. "Daddy's here." She murmured something unintelligible before slipping back into sleep, and I sat there for a moment, watching her. They deserved so much more than this chaos, more than lies and betrayal. I couldn't give them the perfect life I had dreamed of, but I could protect them. Rising to my feet, I glanced at my son one last time, then back at my daughter. My mind was made up. I knew what I had to do. When the first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the windows, the house was eerily calm. The silence was almost peaceful, but it only served to remind me of the storm waiting to return. Danielle and my mother would come back soon, and when they did, I needed to be gone. Every second mattered. Moving quickly, I grabbed what essentials I could for my kids and myself. In the kitchen, I packed a small bag with snacks, water bottles, and their favorite toys. My hands worked with mechanical efficiency, driven by a strange combination of clarity and numbness. The decision was made. Now it was time to act. I stepped into Lily's room as quietly as I could, the soft glow of her nightlight casting a warm hue over her tiny, sleeping form. She was curled under her favorite blanket, her hand tucked beneath her chin, her hair falling messily across her face. For a moment, I hesitated. Waking her felt like stealing a piece of her peace, but we couldn't stay any longer. Gently, I knelt by her bed and brushed a stray hair from her cheek. "Lily," I whispered, my voice low and soothing. "Sweetheart, it's time to wake up. We're going on an adventure." Her eyelids fluttered as she stirred, a small, groggy smile creeping across her face. "Daddy," she murmured, her voice soft and half asleep as she stretched her arms out. "That's right, baby girl," I said, smiling back at her. "It's early, but we're heading somewhere special." She blinked at me, still sleepy but curious. I handed her the small backpack I had packed earlier, a few of her clothes, some books, and her stuffed bunny that she never let out of her sight. She hugged the bunny tightly, yawning into its fur. "Will Mom be there?" she asked, her voice tinged with innocent confusion. The question hit me harder than I expected, but I forced a calm expression as I knelt to meet her eyes. "Not this time, Lily," I said gently. "It's just going to be you, me, and Ethan. We're going on our own little adventure. How does that sound?" She looked at me with wide, thoughtful eyes, clutching her bunny closer. After a moment, she nodded, her small hand reaching out to squeeze mine. "Okay, Daddy," she said with a quiet confidence that melted my heart. I helped her out of bed and led her to the living room, where our bags were already waiting. Her tiny feet padded softly on the floor as she followed me, clutching her bunny like it was her anchor. Next, I made my way into Ethan's room. My 5-year-old was sprawled across his bed, limbs akimbo, his small chest rising and falling with each deep breath. I leaned down and scooped him up carefully, whispering into his ear. "Ethan, buddy, it's time to wake up." He stirred, his eyes opening slowly and focusing on me with that hazy, just woken up expression. "Where are we going?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes with his small fists. I smiled, balancing him on my hip. "We're going somewhere fun, kiddo. Trust me, you're going to love it." Still half asleep, he wrapped his arms around my neck, letting me carry him to the living room. I set him down gently to grab his backpack and double-check that everything was packed. "Daddy, are we really going on an adventure?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I crouched down in front of him, looking him in the eyes with a reassuring smile. "Yes, buddy. It's going to be a new place where we can all be happy. You and Lily are going to love it." Ethan tilted his head, his face serious in a way that made my chest ache. "Are you coming too?" My throat tightened, but I nodded firmly, placing a hand on his small shoulder. "Yes, Ethan. I'll be with you both, every step of the way." That seemed to satisfy him, and he nodded solemnly before holding onto his backpack like it was a lifeline. Once they were bundled into the car, I strapped them in and adjusted their seat belts as they looked around, still half asleep but curious. I took a deep breath before sliding into the driver's seat. I didn't look back at the house, at the life we were leaving behind. There was nothing left there for us. As I pulled out of the driveway, the weight in my chest began to ease with every mile we put between us and that house. The roads were quiet, the morning light just beginning to stretch across the horizon. In the back seat, Lily and Ethan had drifted back to sleep, their heads resting against their seat belts. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror, feeling a surge of fierce protectiveness rise within me. They were my reason for everything, every choice, every sacrifice, every step forward. This was for them. For their future. For a life free from the lies and betrayal that had shattered our world. The car rumbled to a stop at a gas station on the edge of town, its bright neon lights cutting through the stillness of the early morning. Carson stepped out, the cool air brushing against his face as he opened the gas tank and began to fill it. The rhythmic hum of the pump was the only sound, a steady backdrop to the weight of his thoughts. His actions were monumental, uprooting their lives, leaving everything behind, but he felt no regret. His resolve was firm, and his children's safety was all that mattered. As he finished and returned to the car, Carson noticed Lily awake, her big, curious eyes fixed on him through the window. "Where are we, Daddy?" she asked softly as he climbed back into the driver's seat. He smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Just a little stop, sweetheart. We're still on our way." Her face lit up slightly. "Can I have some snacks?" she asked, her hopeful expression pulling a quiet laugh from him. "Of course," Carson replied, reaching into one of the bags and pulling out a small packet of crackers. He handed it to her and took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking. "Listen, kids, I know things might feel a little confusing right now, but I promise you, everything's going to be okay. All right?" Lily nodded, nibbling on her crackers, and Ethan stirred awake in the back seat, his hair tousled and his voice groggy. "Are we there yet?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "Almost, buddy," Carson said with a reassuring smile, though the truth was, he had no idea where there was. He just needed to keep them moving, to buy time to figure out their next steps. As the morning unfolded, Carson continued driving, taking random turns and detours, ensuring they wouldn't be followed. An hour passed before they arrived at a quaint little town that Carson faintly remembered visiting with his parents long ago. It was peaceful, the kind of place that felt untouched by time, with modest homes, a small downtown, and a park shaded by sprawling oak trees. He pulled into the park's lot and turned off the engine, glancing back at the kids. "All right, guys, we're here. Let's go check out the park." Lily and Ethan scrambled out of the car, stretching their little arms and legs as they looked around in wide-eyed wonder. The park was quiet, save for a few early walkers and a couple of families with young children. Carson took their hands and led them to the playground. The kids didn't waste a second. They darted toward the play structures, their laughter ringing out as they climbed, slid, and explored. Carson leaned against a nearby bench, watching them play with a mix of relief and bittersweet joy. For the first time since their world had shattered, they were smiling, unburdened by the chaos he carried inside. "Daddy, look!" Ethan called out, pointing to the swing set. Carson walked over, smiling as he helped him onto the swing and gave him a gentle push. Lily joined on the swing next to him, giggling as her legs kicked in rhythm. Their laughter filled the crisp air, a sound that softened the ache in Carson's chest. After a while, when their energy finally began to wane, they returned to the car. Carson handed out sandwiches and juice boxes, watching them eat with contentment. The day had stretched into early afternoon, and he knew it was time to start thinking about where they'd sleep that night. "Daddy," Lily asked suddenly, her small brow furrowing in thought, "are we going home tomorrow?" Her question stilled him for a moment. He met her gaze, her trusting eyes searching his for answers. Carson took a deep breath, kneeling beside her to speak at her level. "Lily, I don't think we're going back there," he said softly. "We're going to find a new home, somewhere that's just ours. Would that be okay with you?" She looked down, her tiny hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. After a long pause, she nodded, her expression thoughtful but steady. "As long as you're there, Daddy, I don't care where we go," she said quietly, her voice filled with an innocence that made his heart swell. Ethan, clutching his juice box, chimed in with a firm nod. "Yeah, Daddy. Wherever you go, we go." Carson pulled them both close, his arms wrapping tightly around their small frames. In that moment, he felt a renewed determination. No matter what came next, they would face it together. Ethan's eyes widened, and he clutched one of the pillows from their fort. "Are they hurt, Daddy?" he asked, his voice small. Carson nodded, his tone calm and steady, though his heart ached seeing the worry on their faces. A little bit, buddy. But the doctors are taking good care of them. They're going to be okay. Lily bit her lip, her hands fiddling with the edge of her blanket. Are we all going together? She asked, her voice tentative. Carson smiled gently, reaching out to pull both of them into a hug. Yes, we're going together. Don't worry, I'll be with you the whole time. The kid seemed to relax a little in his arms, their trust in him shining through. Okay, Daddy, Lily said softly. As long as you're there. Carson held them close for a moment longer, silently vowing to stay strong for them no matter what. After they packed up their things, he loaded them into the car, his mind racing as they drove toward the hospital. The drive was quiet, save for the soft hum of the tires on the road. The kids sat in the back, their eyes heavy with lingering sleep, while Carson's grip on the steering wheel tightened and loosened with each passing thought. Memories of Marissa's cold gaze and his mother's harsh words flickered in his mind, mingling with the weight of the present moment. He didn't know what he'd say when he saw them, or if he could muster any kindness, but he knew he had to try, for his children. When they arrived at the hospital, Carson parked in a far corner of the lot, taking a moment to steel himself. He glanced back at Lily and Ethan, who were now fully awake and clutching their favorite stuffed toys for comfort. Are we here, Daddy? Lily asked, her voice trembling slightly. Carson nodded. We're here. Stay close to me, okay? Hand in hand, they made their way through the sliding doors of the hospital. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled the air, and the distant murmur of voices and beeping machines echoed in the halls. Carson approached the front desk, his voice low but firm as he inquired about Marissa and his mother. The receptionist directed them to a private room on the second floor. Carson could feel his heartbeat quicken with each step down the long hallway. Finally, they reached the door, and he paused, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. Inside, Marissa lay propped up in a hospital bed, her face pale and her arm in a sling. His mother was seated in a chair beside her, a bandage on her forehead and her expression unreadable. Both women turned to look at him, their gazes flickering with a mix of emotions, relief, guilt, and something that might have been hope. Carson's voice was quiet but firm as he spoke. Lily and Ethan wanted to see you. The kids hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. Mommy! Lily exclaimed, running to Marissa's side and reaching for her uninjured hand. Ethan followed, his wide eyes filled with concern. Marissa's face softened as she looked at her children. Oh, my sweet babies, she murmured, her voice trembling. I'm so glad you're here. Carson stayed near the door, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His mother glanced at him, her expression strained. Carson, she began, her tone hesitant, thank you for coming. He met her gaze but said nothing, his silence heavy with unresolved tension. Instead, he focused on Lily and Ethan, who were chattering to Marissa about their makeshift fort and the sandwiches they'd eaten earlier. As he watched them, Carson felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name, a mix of anger, sadness, and longing. Whatever else had happened, these moments were for his children. He would endure this for them. But he couldn't ignore the growing question in his mind, how much was he willing to forgive for the sake of his family? His mother's lips tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Marissa turned her head away, staring at the sterile hospital wall as if it held some sort of answer. Carson sighed deeply, lowering himself to his children's level. Lily, Ethan, he said gently, brushing their hair with his fingers, Mommy and Grandma are going to need some time to rest and get better. We'll stay for a little while, but then we're going to head back, okay? The kids nodded, their trust in him unshaken. Lily, clutching her stuffed bunny tightly, whispered, Is Mommy coming with us, Daddy? Carson paused, his heart twisting at the question. Not today, sweetheart, he replied carefully, glancing at Marissa. Mommy needs to stay here for now. Marissa's eyes flickered toward him, but she remained silent. The guilt on her face was a stark contrast to her earlier defiance. His mother, however, cleared her throat and spoke again, her tone softer, almost apologetic. Carson, I know I said things that hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping the family intact. I see now that I was wrong. Her voice wavered, her gaze imploring him. But can't we try again? For the children's sake? Carson stood, his jaw tightening as he looked between his mother and Marissa. You both only want to make things right now because you're in this hospital, vulnerable and dependent. Where was this realization before? His tone was measured, but the anger simmered beneath his words. I'm here because of Lily and Ethan. They're the only reason. Marissa's face crumpled, and she reached out with her uninjured hand. Carson, she began, her voice shaky, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance to make things right. For the kids, if nothing else. Carson stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He could hear the regret in her voice, but he couldn't tell if it came from genuine remorse or from fear of losing the stability he had always provided. I don't know if things can ever be made right, he said finally, his voice low but firm. You destroyed the trust we had, Marissa. That doesn't just come back because you say you're sorry. Marissa's eyes filled with tears, and his mother's shoulders slumped. Carson turned his focus back to his kids, who were now sitting on the edge of Marissa's bed, their small hands clutching hers. Let's go, Carson said softly to them after a moment. We'll come back to check on Mommy and Grandma another day. He bent down, helping them off the bed and guiding them toward the door. Carson, his mother called after him, her voice faint. Please don't give up on us. He stopped in the doorway but didn't turn around. His shoulders were tense, his head slightly bowed. You both gave up on me first, he said quietly before walking out, his children's hands clasped tightly in his own. As they made their way back through the hospital corridor, Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with questions she didn't yet know how to ask. Daddy, is Mommy going to be okay? Carson forced a small smile for her sake. Yes, sweetheart. Mommy will be okay. Ethan chimed in, holding Carson's other hand. Are we going to stay with her again? Carson hesitated, glancing down at his son. We'll talk about that later, buddy, he said gently. For now, let's focus on taking care of each other. They stepped out into the crisp evening air, the weight of the hospital visit still heavy on Carson's shoulders. He buckled his kids into the car, climbed into the driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel, staring out at the horizon. He had made a choice to protect his children, to give them a life free of betrayal and lies. But now, the fractured pieces of his family were reaching out, trying to pull him back. As he drove away from the hospital, the questions loomed in his mind. Could he ever find it in himself to forgive? And even if he could, would it ever be enough to rebuild what was broken? Carson approached the table with measured steps, his face impassive. He pulled out the chair across from them and sat down, folding his arms across his chest. You wanted to talk, he said flatly, his voice devoid of warmth. Marissa looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of everything that had transpired. Carson, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, thank you for meeting us. I know I don't deserve it. He said nothing, his expression unchanged. His mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her scarf. We've been talking, his mother said, her voice softer than he remembered it ever being. Marissa and we've realized how much we hurt you. And I've realized how wrong I was. About everything. Carson's gaze flicked to her, cold and unyielding. It's a little late for realizations, don't you think? Marissa flinched at the sharpness of his words but pressed on. Carson, I was selfish. I was cruel. I thought you'd never leave. That you'd stay because of the kids, no matter what I did. I was wrong. And I'm so sorry. He leaned back in his chair, letting her words hang in the air. Sorry doesn't erase what you did, he said, his voice calm but firm. Sorry doesn't fix the betrayal or the lies. You broke our family, Marissa. Her shoulders shook as she fought back tears. I know I did. But I want to make it right. I'll do whatever it takes, Carson. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just, please. Please give me a chance to fix this. Carson's jaw tightened, and he shook his head. Fix it? How do you propose we fix the fact that you threw me away for your boss? That you destroyed the trust our family was built on? You didn't just hurt me, Marissa, you hurt our kids. Do you even realize that? Marissa's tears spilled over, and she covered her face with her hands. His mother reached out, placing a tentative hand on Carson's arm. Son, she said softly, her voice trembling, I failed you too. I should have supported you. I should have stood by you, not by her. I see that now, and I'm so ashamed. But we're here, trying to make things right. Carson pulled his arm away, his expression unyielding. You both made your choices. You sided with her, even knowing what she did. You expected me to swallow my pride and accept it, to live a lie for the sake of appearances. And now, what? Now you realize you need me because you've lost everything? Marissa looked up, her face streaked with tears. It's not about what I've lost. It's about what I threw away. Carson, I was wrong. I've never been more wrong in my life. But I love you. I always have. I was just too blind to see what I had until it was gone. Carson let out a bitter laugh. Love? You call that love? Marissa, love doesn't destroy the person it's supposed to cherish. Love doesn't betray or manipulate. Whatever you felt for me, it wasn't love. His mother's eyes filled with tears, and she clasped her hands tightly. Carson, I know we've hurt you more than I can ever understand. But I'm begging you, for the sake of the kids, don't close the door on us completely. They need their mother. They need their family. Carson's fists clenched on the table, his knuckles white. The kids have me, he said, his voice low and steady. And that's enough. I won't keep them from their mother, but I won't let you two manipulate me into pretending everything is fine. It's not fine. It will never be fine. Marissa reached out across the table, her voice cracking. Please, Carson. Don't give up on us. Don't give up on what we had. He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back with a scrape. What we had is gone, Marissa. You made sure of that. I'm here for the kids. That's it. Turning to his mother, he added, and you? You taught me that loyalty only works one way in this family. Don't expect me to forget that. He glanced at the two women, both of them broken in their own way, then turned and walked out of the cafe without a backward glance. The cool evening air hit his face as he stepped outside, but instead of feeling burdened, he felt lighter. He had said everything he needed to say, made his stance clear. There was no going back now, and for the first time in months, he felt at peace with that. As he climbed into his car and drove away, he thought of his children waiting for him back at the motel. They were his priority now, his reason for moving forward. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, his future would no longer be defined by betrayal and broken promises. It would be defined by the love he had for his kids and the life he was determined to build for them. Carson's gaze remained cold, unmoved by her tears. His voice, steady and cutting, pierced through the tension in the room. Sorry isn't enough, Marissa, he said. It doesn't undo what you did. It doesn't erase the betrayal or the damage you caused. You didn't just hurt me, you tore apart everything we built together. Sorry won't fix that. Marissa visibly crumbled under the weight of his words. Her hands trembled as she clutched at the edge of the table, her voice faltering. I know, she whispered. I know I can't take it back, but I want to try. I'll do anything to make it right. I'll go to therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Please, Carson, don't walk away from this family. He shook his head, leaning forward, his tone sharp and unyielding. You walked away from this family the moment you decided your selfish desires mattered more than your vows, more than our kids. Don't pin this on me. I'm not the one who tore us apart, you did that all on your own. His mother, who had been silent for a moment, spoke up, her voice wavering. Carson, she's trying to make amends. Can't you at least consider giving her another chance? For the children? He turned his icy glare toward her. For the children, he echoed, his voice dripping with disdain. You mean the children I've been protecting while you and Marissa justified betrayal as if it were nothing more than a bad decision? The children you expected me to stay for while you pushed me to accept lies and disrespect? You don't get to use them as leverage now. His mother's lips quivered, and she dropped her gaze to the table. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want the family to fall apart. Carson's voice softened slightly, though the anger still simmered beneath his words. Then maybe you should have stood by the one person who was trying to hold it together. Instead, you sided with the person who destroyed it. You made your choice, and now you get to live with it. Marissa wiped her tears, desperation thick in her voice as she reached for him again. Carson, please. I'll do anything. I just want a chance to prove that I can change. That I can be the wife and mother I should have been all along. He stared at her, his expression unreadable, then spoke with a quiet finality that cut through the air like a blade. The wife and mother you should have been died the moment you betrayed this family. The person sitting across from me is a stranger. I can't rebuild a family with someone I don't even know anymore. Her face crumpled, and she sank back into her chair, defeated. His mother reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. Carson, she said, her voice cracking, please don't cut us out completely. We've made mistakes, but we're still your family. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor as he pushed it back. No, he said firmly, his voice unwavering. My family is Lily and Ethan. They're the only ones who matter now. I've given you both more chances than you deserved, and you threw them away. I'm done. Marissa sobbed quietly, her head bowed, while his mother sat in stunned silence, unable to find the words to respond. Carson looked at them both one last time, his expression resolute. I hope you both figure out how to live with the choices you made, he said. Because I've already made mine. Without another word, he turned and walked away. The cool evening air hit him as he stepped outside, and he took a deep breath, letting it fill his lungs. The weight on his shoulders didn't feel as crushing anymore. He had said what he needed to say, drawn the line he needed to draw. Climbing into his car, he glanced at his phone where a photo of his children lit up the screen. They were his purpose now, his future. As he drove away from the cafe, leaving the remnants of his broken past behind, he felt a newfound clarity. This was the beginning of something better, not for Marissa, not for his mother, but for himself and his kids. For the life they deserved, free of lies and betrayal. And for the first time in a long time, Carson felt at peace. Jason gestured toward the kids playing on the swings. Are those your little ones? He asked, his tone warm. Yeah, Carson said with a proud smile. That's Lily, my oldest, and Ethan, my little guy. Jason chuckled. They look happy. You've got your hands full, huh? Carson nodded, watching his kids with a mixture of pride and gratitude. It's a lot, but they're worth every second. Jason's expression softened. I heard about, well, what happened. I didn't want to reach out because I figured you needed space, but I'm sorry, man. No one deserves to go through that. Carson's smile faded slightly, and he looked down at his hands. It was tough, he admitted. Still is some days. But we're getting through it. We're building something better, and I can honestly say we're in a good place now. Jason nodded thoughtfully. That's good to hear. You've always been one of the strongest guys I know. If anyone can come out of something like that stronger, it's you. Carson felt a surge of gratitude for the kind words, and he clapped Jason on the shoulder. Thanks, man. That means a lot. They sat on the bench for a while, catching up as the kids played. Carson found himself laughing more than he had in months, the easy camaraderie with Jason a welcome reprieve. It felt good to reconnect, to talk about something other than the chaos of the past. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Lily and Ethan came running over, breathless and grinning. Daddy, look at what we made. Ethan exclaimed, holding up a pile of carefully collected leaves and twigs. That's awesome, buddy, Carson said, crouching down to admire the handiwork. You're a regular little engineer. Lily tugged at his sleeve. Daddy, can we come back here tomorrow? Carson smiled, ruffling her hair. Of course, sweetheart. We can come back as much as you want. Jason watched the exchange with a smile of his own. You're doing good, Carson. Real good. Carson straightened up, looking at Jason. Thanks, Jason. I'm just trying to be the dad they deserve. Jason nodded. Well, you're nailing it, man. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. As Jason walked away, Carson felt a warmth settle over him. The encounter had been unexpected but comforting, a reminder that not everything in his life was broken or lost. He looked back at his children, who were already running back to the playground, their laughter ringing out in the crisp afternoon air. For the first time in a long time, Carson felt truly at peace. The weight of the past was no longer crushing him, and the future didn't feel so uncertain. He knew there would still be challenges, but he also knew he could face them. He wasn't alone, he had Lily, Ethan, and the determination to build a life filled with love, honesty, and joy. As he watched the sun set behind the trees, Carson knew one thing for certain: they were going to be okay. Carson turned to Sarah, her words settling over him like a soft blanket. He gave her a small, grateful smile. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything, for being here, for understanding. She smiled back, her eyes warm. I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Carson. You've been through so much, and you've come out of it with your kids' happiness as your priority. That's not something everyone can say. He looked down at their joined hands, her touch grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. Some days, I feel like I'm just figuring it out as I go, he admitted. But when I see Lily and Ethan smile, it makes all the uncertainty worth it. Sarah nodded. That's what matters. You're building something real, something stable for them, and for yourself. They sat in silence for a moment, the cool night air wrapping around them. Carson sipped his tea, glancing up at the stars. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't carrying the weight of regret or resentment. Instead, he felt a quiet contentment, a sense that life was finally moving in the right direction. You know, Sarah said, breaking the silence, you're not just figuring it out, you're thriving. It's okay to let yourself feel proud of that. Carson chuckled softly. I don't know about thriving, but I'm getting there. She tilted her head, studying him with a thoughtful smile. You're too humble for your own good. He laughed, the sound light and genuine. Maybe. But I'll take it over where I was a year ago. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting to the kids' bedroom window. Lily and Ethan are lucky to have you. You've created something safe and beautiful for them, a place where they can just be kids. Carson followed her gaze, his chest tightening with emotion. They're my whole world. Everything I do, it's for them. And it shows, she said softly. But don't forget that you deserve happiness too, Carson. Not just them. He glanced at her, a warmth spreading through him that he hadn't felt in years. Her words carried a sincerity that he couldn't ignore. You know, he said, his voice steady but quiet, for the first time in a long time, I think I'm starting to believe that. Sarah smiled, her eyes holding his for a long moment before she looked away, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. Good, she said, her tone playful yet heartfelt. Because it's true. The night stretched on, the quiet between them comfortable and filled with unspoken understanding. As the chill deepened, Sarah stood, brushing off her coat. I should probably head home, she said. It's getting late. Carson nodded, standing as well. Let me walk you to your car. As they reached her car, she turned to him, her smile soft. Thanks for tonight, Carson. For trusting me enough to share all of this. He smiled back, his voice steady. Thank you, Sarah. For listening, for being here, for everything. She hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. Good night, Carson. Good night, Sarah, he said, watching as she climbed into her car and drove away. As he walked back to the house, Carson felt a strange but welcome sensation, a glimmer of hope for the future. He wasn't sure where this path with Sarah would lead, but for the first time, he was open to the possibilities. His life, once shattered, was slowly being pieced back together, and in its place was something stronger, something real. When he stepped inside, he checked on the kids, their peaceful faces bathed in the soft glow of their nightlight. He lingered for a moment, whispering, "We're going to be okay. I promise." And as he climbed into bed that night, Carson let himself rest, the weight of the past finally lifting, making room for the future. Carson sat back on the couch, letting the weight of the day melt away. Sarah leaned against him, her head resting gently on his shoulder. The soft hum of the night filled the room, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace. Do you ever think about how far we've come? Sarah asked quietly, her voice a soft murmur in the calm. Carson smiled, his eyes glancing toward the hallway where his children were fast asleep. All the time, he admitted. It feels like a different life, a different me. She shifted slightly to look at him, her eyes warm and filled with admiration. You've done so much for them, Carson. For yourself. You deserve this happiness. He looked at her, his chest tightening in the best way. I wouldn't have made it here without you, he said honestly. You reminded me that there's still good in the world, even after everything. Sarah reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. You did the hard work. I was just here to cheer you on. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the connection between them speaking louder than words ever could. Carson let his mind wander, thinking about the person he had been just a year ago, hurt, betrayed, and lost. He could hardly recognize that version of himself now. The weight of his past no longer suffocated him. Instead, it served as a reminder of his strength, a testament to his resilience. Do you think Marissa and your mom will ever stop trying? Sarah asked softly, careful not to disrupt the peace of the moment. Carson shrugged, his expression calm. Maybe. Maybe not. It doesn't matter anymore. I've let them go, and I've made my peace with it. They have their lives, and I have mine. Sarah nodded, a small smile on her lips. I'm glad you're at peace, Carson. You've earned it. He squeezed her hand, a sense of quiet gratitude washing over him. I am, he said firmly. For the first time, I really am. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Each one brought new milestones, Lily mastering her bike without training wheels, Ethan winning his first soccer game, and Sarah becoming an increasingly cherished part of their lives. She wasn't just a partner to Carson, she was a steady, loving presence for his kids. Together, they created a home filled with warmth, laughter, and a sense of belonging. One crisp spring morning, Carson stood in the backyard, watching as Ethan and Lily chased each other around the small garden. Sarah was by his side, her laughter echoing in the fresh air. The sun bathed the scene in golden light, and Carson couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. He leaned down, picking up a small, hand-painted sign that Lily had made for the garden. It read, "Our family." The words were simple, but they carried a profound truth. Carson placed the sign in the soil, standing back to admire it. Sarah slipped her arm around his waist, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Looks perfect," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "It does," he agreed, his heart full. As he looked at his children, their laughter ringing through the air, and at Sarah, who had brought so much light into their lives, Carson felt a quiet certainty settle over him. The life he had now wasn't just a second chance, it was the life he was always meant to have. And as the day stretched on, filled with love and simple joys, Carson knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because this time, he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift of all.